light, right? Born from like a burst of energy.
Okay.
And it's just cruising across the universe for billions of years.
Yeah.
That's a photon.
That's right.
And you wanted to know how they do it. How do they make these like epic journeys?
Yeah, how do they keep that off?
So, buckle up. We're going to take a deep dive into the world of photons, the mind-blowing world of photons. And we've got like a whole stack of research here.
Oh, yeah, tons of it.
That's going to help us illuminate the way.
Light the way. Literally.
Yeah.
It's a wild ride trying to understand the physics of it all. Like, we'll be tackling what it actually means for a particle to be massless, right?
Yeah.
And then we've got this concept of invariant mass. We're going to have to wrestle with that a bit.
Okay.
And then we'll dive into why exactly a photon's energy isn't just, a little chunk of an electron breaking off.
Yeah.
It's more complex than that.
Okay, so first things first. How can they travel these ridiculous distances? Like, what makes them such good long-distance travelers?
Well, our sources point to a few key things about photons. That they're massless.
Okay.
They always travel at the speed of light, when they're in a vacuum.
Right.
And their energy, it can't be destroyed.
Mm.
It's pretty incredible.
So they're basically unstoppable. It's like in the vast emptiness of space, they're just these little, like, tiny cosmic endurance runners.
Yeah. Exactly. Like nothing can stop them. There's very little out there to get in their way.
Right.
So they just keep going and going for, billions of years.
Billions of years. Wow.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Okay, so here's where I really start to get tripped up. We always hear about this whole, like, mass and energy are interchangeable thing, right?
Right.
Thanks to Einstein, MSO.
The famous equation.
Right, exactly. But photons are massless.
Right.
So how does that work?
That's a question that gets a lot of people scratching their heads.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this tendency to think that anytime energy gets released, it's because a particle has lost some of its mass, right?
Yeah.
But with photons, what we're actually dealing with is something called invariant mass.
Invariant mass. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that different from just regular mass?
It is. It's, think of it this way.
Okay.
Imagine, like, you're at a basketball game.
Okay.
From your seat, way up high, the ball looks like it's just moving in this straight line, right?
Yeah.
But for the player, dribbling the ball's motion is all this like complex dance of their hand and the court and everything. The way the ball seems to move, it totally changes depending on your perspective, on your frame of reference.
Okay, so invariant mass is it kind of like the ball itself? Like it doesn't matter who's watching it, it's always the same?
Exactly. You nailed it. Invariant mass, it's a particle's like intrinsic mass.
Okay.
It doesn't change no matter how fast it's moving or who's looking at it.
Okay, so even though a photon's energy, like you think it would have to like correspond to some kind of mass, right?
Yeah.
But it's this invariant mass thing that really defines it.
Yeah, that's the key.
Okay.
It's like this ID card, this fingerprint for that photon. And it doesn't matter how far it travels, that initial energy difference that created it, it's all encoded in that invariant mass.
So like even if a photon travels for billions of years, it still carries that information.
Exactly. It's like a little time capsule.
That's wild.
Now, here's a question for you. If invariant mass is fixed, does that mean all photons with the same energy are basically identical? Like, are they all just interchangeable packets of light?
Yeah, I mean, that's what it sounds like.
It's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what makes these particles so fascinating. You see, even though they might have the same energy, the way they interact with the universe can be completely different.
Oh, interesting.
But before we get into that, let's tackle another brain teaser. How do scientists actually measure invariant mass, especially when we're talking about particles that are constantly in motion?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's not like they could just like put a photon on a tiny scale, right?
Oh, no, it's definitely not that simple.
Right.
It's kind of like, I don't know, like trying to weigh a feather during a hurricane.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Got all these things working against you, like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. That tells us we can't know both the position and the momentum of a particle at the same time.
Right.
And then you've got thermal motion. So, even at super low temperatures, particles are still jiggling around.
Uh-huh.
And then to make things even more complicated, you've got quantum fluctuations where particles can like briefly pop in and out of existence.
So it's like a three-ring circus of chaos.
Exactly. So how do physicists make sense of all that? Well, they've come up with some incredibly clever tricks.
Really?
Oh, yeah, they use approximations, limits, and they've built these amazing detectors. These detectors can, like, reconstruct a particle's properties even after they've smashed them together at crazy high speeds.
It's like they're piecing together, like, a puzzle, right, from these tiny little pieces of evidence.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. They're like cosmic detectives.
That's awesome.
And the amazing part, even with all this uncertainty, they can still measure invariant mass with incredible accuracy. It's mind-blowing.
That is mind-boggling.
It really is. So now that we know that photons have this fixed, unchanging invariant mass,
Right.
it makes their creation even more fascinating. I mean, how do these massless particles even come into existence? Where do they come from in the first place?
Yeah, where do they come from?
Well, one of the most common ways is through these things called electron energy transitions. It all happens inside atoms.
Right, right. Like when an electron absorbs some energy
Yeah,
and it jumps up to a higher energy level, and then when it falls back down, it releases that energy as a photon.
that's it. But here's the key.
Okay,
This doesn't mean that a little chunk of the electron's mass is flying off as a photon.
okay,
What's actually happening is that the energy difference between the electron's energy levels,
okay.
that's what gets converted into a massless photon. The electron itself, it keeps its own invariant mass.
So it's not like a piece of the electron breaking off. It's more like it's passing on energy?
Yeah, it's like a game of hot potato with energy, maybe.
I like that. Yeah, the electron's tossing the hot potato, and the photon is the potato.
Aha, exactly. And don't forget, there are other ways photons can be created too, like when you accelerate charged particles, or when a particle and its antiparticle decide to, annihilate each other.
Wow.
But the main takeaway here is that a photon's energy isn't coming from a piece of another particle's mass.
Yeah.
It's pure energy conversion, plain and simple.
You know, this deep dive is really making me rethink everything I thought I knew about light.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just some, like, simple beam shining down, There's this whole crazy world of energy and invariant mass and all this quantum stuff happening behind the scenes.
It's a lot more complex than people realize, yeah.
Yeah, and we're just getting started.
We are just getting started. We still need to unpack how this whole energy momentum dance works. And then there's this big question. How can we even talk about rest mass when everything in the universe is constantly in motion?
Right. It's like, where do you even begin with that?
Exactly. So much to explore.
Buckle up, everybody. It sounds like this is about to get even deeper.
Oh, absolutely. Before we jump ahead too far,
Okay.
let's rewind a sec
Okay.
and dig a little deeper into the electron's role in all this.
All right. Yeah, back to the electrons. I'm still trying to wrap my head around, like, how their energy levels actually work. It's not like they just speed up or slow down, is it?
You're right. It's not that simple. I mean, it's easy to imagine electrons in those higher energy levels just zooming around faster, right? Like tiny little race cars.
Yeah.
But that's where quantum mechanics comes in and throws a wrench in things.
Right, because we know that they don't actually follow these, like, perfect little orbits like planets around the sun.
No.
They're hanging out in these, like, fuzzy probability clouds, the orbitals.
Exactly, the orbitals. And those are governed by the rules of quantum mechanics.
Right.
So when an electron absorbs energy and jumps to a higher energy level, it's not like it's suddenly hitting the gas pedal. Instead, its probability distribution changes.
Okay.
So the regions where it's more likely to be found, they shift farther away from the nucleus.
So it's not really about speed then. It's more about its, like, relationship to the nucleus changing.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And as the electron gains more and more energy, its behavior starts to become more wave-like.
Okay.
It's almost like, imagine like a blurry fan spinning super fast.
Okay.
You can't pinpoint where each blade is at any given moment.
Right.
But, they've got more energy because of that blur.
Yeah. Okay, that helps.
Good.
But this whole momentum thing, it's still kind of confusing. Like, if an electron has more energy and it's, I don't know, for lack of a better word, like buzzing around more energetically,
Yeah.
doesn't it, like, basically mean it has more mass?
That's a really common misconception, but it's super important to understand the difference.
Okay.
Increased momentum might seem like it's similar to increased mass, but they're really fundamentally different things.
Okay, help me out here. We talked about mass being, like, this inherent property of an object.
Right, like it's stuff.
Yeah, it's stuff. But how's momentum different?
All right, think of it this word. Mass is like the amount of clay you have, okay?
Okay.
Momentum is all about how you're shaping and moving that clay.
Okay.
It depends on both the mass of the object and its velocity.
So, like, if I roll that clay into a ball and give it a good push,
Yeah.
I'm changing its momentum, but not the amount of clay I have, right?
Exactly, you got it. The clay's mass stays the same, that fundamental clayness.
Right.
But the momentum, its movement through space.
Yeah.
That's affected by how fast it's going and in what direction.
Okay, that makes sense. But that brings me back to something we were talking about earlier.
Okay.
This whole rest mass idea.
Yeah.
And how we need this specific frame of reference to measure it.
Right.
But isn't that kind of a paradox? Like, everything in the universe is moving.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. It's like galaxies are spinning, stars are orbiting, atoms are vibrating. It's like a never-ending cosmic dance. So how can anything truly be at rest?
That is such a sharp observation.
Thanks.
You're totally right. There's no such thing as absolute stillness in the universe. Not at all.
So how can we even talk about rest mass?
Well, when we talk about rest in physics, we're not talking about like some ultimate stillness. It's all relative, like those frames of reference we talked about earlier.
Right, right, like the basketball analogy.
Exactly. I remember what looks like a straight line to one person might be this crazy dance to someone else.
Yeah.
Something can be at rest relative to you, even if it's moving relative to someone else.
So rest mass, it's kind of a misleading term, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
It's really about finding a frame of reference where the object just appears to be still.
You got it. When we say rest mass, we're talking about its mass in a frame of reference where its velocity is zero.
Okay.
It's like finding that specific perspective where we can simplify the object's motion and just focus on its inherent mass.
But wouldn't that mean you'd need to find like a point where both the observer and the object are perfectly still relative to each other?
Right.
And with all the uncertainty and motion and everything we've been talking about, isn't that pretty much impossible?
You're hitting on a key point. Achieving perfect stillness. It's impossible, and that's where those limitations come in.
Right, right.
The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, thermal motion, quantum fluctuations.
All that fun stuff.
All that. It makes it impossible to know both a particle's position and momentum with like perfect accuracy at the same time.
So are physicists basically chasing this impossible dream then? Trying to measure something that can't truly be measured?
It's not quite like that. They've developed these incredibly smart ways to get around those limitations.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's kind of like, think of it like trying to measure a soap bubble.
Okay.
If you get too close, you change it, right?
Yeah.
So physicists have to be clever.
So what kind of tricks are we talking about here?
Well, they use approximations.
Okay.
They're finding ways to get super close to a particle's rest frame, even if they can't quite get there perfectly.
Right.
And they've got all these sophisticated analysis methods to sift through the data,
Okay.
pull out the meaningful measurements from all that noise.
Wow.
And sometimes they can even use what's called the center of mass frame.
The center of mass frame.
Yeah, for systems with multiple particles.
Okay, that sounds even more complicated.
I know, the name's a mouthful, but the idea is pretty cool. Imagine like two ice skaters pushing off each other.
Okay.
They'll both move in opposite directions, right?
Right, equal and opposite reactions or something like that.
Badly, Newton's third law, the center of mass frame is like finding that point right between them where their combined momentum is zero. It's a way to make the system's motion simpler, even though the individual particles are still moving.
So they're like finding ways to measure things as if they were perfectly still,
Yeah.
even though they know that perfect stillness just doesn't exist.
Exactly. It's all about using their knowledge of physics to cut through the noise and get to those fundamental properties, even in a universe that's constantly in motion.
Wow. It's pretty amazing how much work goes into figuring all this stuff out.
It really is.
You know, when we started this whole deep dive, I thought I had a decent grasp on basic physics, but now I'm realizing how much, I don't know.
That's the beauty of science, though, isn't it? The more we learn, the more we realize there's so much more out there to discover.
Yeah, no kidding. But I have to say, I'm feeling a lot better about how I understand, how photons can travel these crazy distances.
Oh, that's great.
Like it's all because they're massless, and they're always going at the speed of light, and their energy can't be destroyed.
Exactly. It all comes down to those fundamental properties.
Yeah, and we've learned all about invariant mass and frames of reference.
And don't forget the complexities of energy and momentum.
Right, right. But it feels like we've just scratched the surface here.
Oh, we definitely have.
Like, we've talked a lot about how photons are created, but what about the end of their journey? Like, what happens when a photon actually reaches its destination?
Ah, excellent question. And that leads us perfectly into the next chapter of our little photon adventure, the fascinating ways they interact with the matter in our universe.
Let's do it. Man, we've been on quite a journey with these photons.
We have.
We've seen how they're born. We've dug into all their weird properties.
All those quantum quirks.
Yeah, exactly. And we even got into, like, the crazy world of quantum mechanics to try to figure out how scientists actually measure their invariant mass.
It's a wild ride, isn't it?
Yeah. But now we're at, like, the last stop on our photon adventure. What happens when a photon's big journey finally comes to an end?
The grand finale.
Right. Because we've been talking about how they can travel for billions of years. But they can't just keep going forever, can they? Like, something has to happen to all that energy eventually, right?
You're absolutely right. A photon's journey comes to an end when it interacts with matter.
Oh, hey?
And that interaction, that's where its energy gets absorbed.
Okay, absorbed. But what does that actually look like? Give me an example.
Well, let's think about something we experience all the time.
Sight, okay?
Yeah, so when you see something, what's really happening is photons are entering your eyes.
Right.
And they're interacting with those light-sensitive cells in your retina.
Hold on. So when I'm looking at I don't know, like a beautiful sunset, I'm actually like absorbing photons that have traveled all the way from the sun.
That's exactly what's happening. Those photons, they were born from the sun's nuclear fusion.
Hmm.
They've traveled millions of miles across space, entered your eye, and interacted with your retina.
Hmm.
And that triggers all these signals that your brain then interprets as the colors and patterns of the sunset.
So I'm basically like catching these little pieces of ancient sunlight.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It really highlights the incredible connection we have to the universe through light.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing.
It really is. But vision, that's just one example.
Right.
Photons can also be absorbed by atoms,
Okay.
and that causes their electrons to jump to those higher energy levels we talked about.
Right, right.
Or they can be absorbed by molecules,
Okay.
and that can trigger all sorts of chemical reactions.
Oh, like photosynthesis, right. Plants use sunlight to create energy.
Exactly. Photons are essential for that whole process. It's all about energy transfer.
Hmm.
The photon's energy, it gets absorbed by the plant's chlorophyll, and that sets off this chain reaction,
Yeah.
and that converts light energy into chemical energy.
So it's like, I don't know, like a cosmic relay race or something. Like a photon starts out, I don't know, billions of years ago from some distant event, travels all this way across the universe, and then it passes the baton like it's energy when it gets absorbed by something.
I love that analogy. That's perfect. And think about this. That energy, the one that originated from some ancient event, it could be helping a plant grow right now, it could be creating oxygen, or it could even end up in the food we eat.
Wow, you're really making me see sunlight in a whole new way.
I'm glad to hear it.
It's not just something that like warms us up or makes things visible. It's like this flow of energy connecting us to things that happened like forever ago and across these massive distances.
It's a pretty profound thought, isn't it? But here's where things get even more mind-boggling.
Oh boy, more mind-boggling.
We've been focusing on how photons interact with all the stuff we can see, right?
Yeah.
But what about all that stuff we can't see? The dark matter and dark energy that make up most of the universe. What role do photons play there?
That's a good question. I mean, if we could only detect the photons that actually like interact with our instruments or our eyes,
Yeah.
are we missing a whole lot of photon activity that's happening all around us?
That's a question that keeps physicists up at night. I mean, we've learned so much about the universe, but we're still just scratching the surface. There's so much more to discover about photons, their interaction, and what they can tell us about, the nature of reality itself.
You know, when we started this deep dive, I thought it was going to be all about how photons travel these incredible distances.
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely covered that, but what's really blown me away was how connected that is to, like, the fundamental workings of the universe.
It's a great reminder that even these tiny little particles can reveal these huge truths about the cosmos.
Yeah, and the more we learn about them, the more we realize there's even more to learn.
Exactly. It's an endless journey of discovery.
Well, I think it's safe to say this deep dive has been a huge success.
I agree.
We've explored the birth, the journey, and the ultimate fate of photons.
We covered it all.
And along the way, we've uncovered all these insights about energy, mass, quantum mechanics.
And the interconnectedness of it all.
Exactly. And for everyone listening, remember, the journey of discovery doesn't stop here.
Keep those questions coming.
Yeah, keep exploring, keep looking for those amazing things that the universe has to offer.
Absolutely.
So the next time you see a little bit of sunlight, take a second to really appreciate the amazing journey those photons have taken. They're like these tiny little messengers from space, carrying stories of distant stars and ancient events and the forces that shape our reality. And who knows what other secrets they're waiting to tell us.